No, to the contrary, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce to you a bit informally Christian and say a couple of words about his work. But since we have talked so much about psychology in the last days, I would switch the topic a bit to sports and tell you that in Germany we have a state, it's the state of Thuringia, where this beautiful city of Jena is located. Some of you have been visiting us there. And it is my impression that in the state of Thuringia we have many more successful sports persons than in the rest of Germany. So the population is quite small, but they have a vast number of gold medal winners compared to German standards. Why might this be the case? I have, of course, no idea, but well, I think there may be several factors combined. Maybe it depends on or is influenced by the personality of the Thuringian people. They are very conscientious. They are high on perseverance. Maybe it has something to do with talent. Maybe it has something to do with thinking and living in some parts in isolation, focusing on their tasks. And now you may wonder why I'm telling you all this. And the answer is very easy. Christian is from Thuringia. That's where I met him. I will hurry up a bit. That's where I met him first in 2007. It's not exactly, but in 2007, Christian started to work in my group. And his first task was a very easy task. He had to run, I guess, several hundreds of structural equation models, moderating models, so the top of the art, state of the art at that time, and he was a student. So he really started with a challenging task and he really performed well right from the beginning. This continued. He changed together with me from Thuringia to Bielefeld, and there he began his dissertation, which was finished, I think, within 2 years. Very successful publications. I don't want to go into the details of his work because he will tell you what he has been doing. He published in the best journals, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, several publications. His topics were gene-environment interplay, genes and environment influencing stability and change of personality. And it was for me really exciting to see how both of our award winners are similar in so many aspects of their research. And the work Christian did was on, as I said, on personality, but he sees personality in this broad sense like Guilford many years ago did. So he extends his work to social attitudes and recently to the domain of interest. And I'm really looking forward for your presentation now, Christian. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind introduction and your support and advice. Without this, I couldn't stand here. Okay, I would like to talk about personality development between nature and nurture. But before I can talk about personality development, I first have to explain what I mean with personality. And second, I would like to highlight patterns of continuity and change in personality based on different types of continuity and change. And then I will illustrate how theories of genetic set points, genetically based tendencies, and genetic maturation, as well as perspectives of environmental personality development, can explain these patterns of stability and change. And finally, I would like to introduce an integrative model of personality development between nature and nurture. In this talk, I would like to focus on narrow-sense personality traits. Narrow-sense personality traits represent at least economic descriptives, or maybe even tendencies, potentials of typical thoughts, feelings, and behavior, but not performance-related aspects such as abilities, capacities, and talents, and to a lesser extent, volitional and cognitive aspects of behavior such as motives, goals, interests, values, attitudes, and so on. So I focus on narrow-sense personality traits. There are several models of personality traits that describe individual differences on the basis of different personality dimensions. For example, Eysenck's Big Three, Costa and McRae's five-factor model, Intelligence multidimensional personality model, and so on and so on. Unfortunately, there are at the moment an insufficient number of behavioral, genetic, longitudinal studies on personality development within one of these models. Thus, at the moment, we are not able to sufficiently focus on personality development between nature and nurture across the entire lifespan within one of these models, and that's too bad. Fortunately, however, these models have at least two trait dimensions in common, and these two traits are represented by neuroticism or negative emotionality and extroversion or positive emotionality. And the combined review on studies on neuroticism and extroversion allows providing a picture of personality development between nature and nurture in adulthood, and that's good. According to Eysenck, one of the founders of this society, neuroticism reflects a continuum from emotional stability or adjustment to emotional lability or maladjustment, whereas extroversion characterizes a continuum from, introverted to extroverted. And these dimensions are relatively independent from each other and are thus useful to describe individual differences in personality. Due to the aforementioned lack of studies, my talk on personality development is limited to these two dimensions of personality. Now, how can we statistically describe developmental patterns? Several types of continuity and change from different perspectives are useful here. For example, we can focus on population statistics such as rank order continuity, mean level trends, or structural continuity. We can also focus on individual parameters such as individual continuity and change, as well as profile or ipsative continuity. The rank order continuity represents the stability of individual differences over time. It is often computed with test-retest correlations, and several studies have found a reversely U-shaped pattern for rank order continuity for neuroticism and extroversion across adulthood. The continuity is low in childhood, but rises across adolescence and young adulthood, reaching a plateau between 0.70 and 0.80, between the ages of 40 and 70, and in old ages, stability appears to decay again. Irrespective of the age group studied, stability coefficients decline as the time intervals between measurements of personality traits get longer. However, it is unclear whether this trend continuously declines to zero with test-retest interval, or if it reaches a plateau around 0.50 or 0.40. Most longitudinal studies with at least 4 times of measuring suggest a gradual decline in consistency, reaching an asymptote of about 0.40. And these patterns of stability and instability in individual ranks on personality dimensions point to the fact that personality development is a lifelong individual process. Beyond rank order continuity, it is also possible to compute individual specific continuity coefficients. the stability of personality values within individuals over time. It is computable with the IS coefficient by Asendorf. Individual continuities show an average pattern across age quite similar to the pattern of the rank order continuity. They increase from childhood to adulthood. However, we can also see large individual differences in individual continuities, whereas the most individuals show a high continuity larger than 0.7 t, the continuity in some individuals, as you can see here in the figure, is rather low. Also similar to the rank order continuity, the individual continuity declines as the time intervals between measurements of personality traits get longer. However, the IS coefficients only decline to a specific level around 0.60 and 0.7 t. That is, individual personality can change to some degree, but not totally, except maybe for some individuals, as you can see here in the figure. The ipsative or profile continuity reflects the stability of an individual set of values and several personality traits over time. And this type of continuity is often computed by so-called Q correlations. And here again, you can find the same pattern of personality continuity across age we have already seen for the rank order and the individual stability coefficients. From childhood to adolescence, the average profile continuity ranges between 0.43 and 0.71, with large individual differences between negative 0.44 and 0.92. From adolescence to young adulthood, average profile continuity reaches levels around 0.7 t, with large individual differences between negative 0.30 and perfect profile continuity. And in adulthood, profile continuity coefficients are often larger than 0.80 for most individuals. Let's have a look at mean level trends, their average trend in a population or a sample. Here you can see results from a study based on over 1 million people from English-speaking countries. After puberty, extroversion remains relatively stable on average across adulthood. Females, represented by doublets, are more extroverted than males, and this gender difference appears to decline with age. Regarding neuroticism, you can see a burst of emotional instability in females during adolescence, whereas males remain relatively stable, resulting in a large gender difference in young adulthood. However, for both men and women, there is a trend from emotional lability to emotional stability across adulthood, and the gender difference appears to decrease with age. And finally, a few words to the individual change and structural continuity. There are individual differences in the degree of individual change. Some individuals even show contra-normative trends. So maybe it would be interesting to know what's up with these people who show contra-normative trends. And with respect to the structural continuity, across several models of personality, the structure can be treated as constant from adolescence to old age. So it's not so interesting to focus on structural continuity of narrow sense personality traits across age. So what have we learned from these results on continuity and change? Personality is relatively stable, in particular in middle adulthood. Personality change is possible in every age, in particular in young and old age. And the more time goes by, the more change is likely. But what are the sources of these patterns of continuity and change? The genetic set point theory is a prominent theory that attributes long-term stability of individual differences in personality to stable differences in individual genetic set points. Environmental influences are assumed to represent situational effects affecting short-term changes and fluctuations around the genetic set points, in particular in young and old ages. In fact, This theory can explain why personality continuity is slower in younger and older ages. Adolescents and young adults report more positive and negative life events and changes than middle-aged people. Moves, several graduations, job and family-related changes. And older adults also report more life events than people between the ages 30 and 60. For example, retirement, death and illness of close relatives and peers, care of deceased partner, and so on. But this classic set point perspective cannot explain long-term rank order and mean level change, because it cannot explain real change. The theory of genetic basic tendencies and intrinsic maturational processes exceeds the genetic set point theory. It attributes continuity to relatively stable, genetically anchored basic tendencies. It explains change by genetically coded maturation, in particular in the first decades of life, and by environmentally affected but biologically mediated long-term changes. It also explains short-term fluctuations by situational, environmental influences, and by error of measurement. And this theory can explain long-term mean level as well as rank order changes. In line with the hypothesis of biological maturation is the universality of mean level trends across several nations and cultures. For example, neuroticism decreases with age in 42 different cultures and nations. For example, in these 5 nations here. Also in line with the theory of genetically anchored basic tendencies is that 50% of individual differences at a given time is attributable to genetic effects. Moreover, consistent components over time and across several situations showed larger genetic influences of about 60 to 70%. There are environmental influences on long-term stability and cross-situational consistency too. However, this theory negates strong environmental influences on long-term stability and cross-situational consistency. On the other hand, nearly all longitudinal studies relied on self-reports, so maybe systematic and stable biases in self-reports, such as social desirability, acquiescence, extreme response styles, and so on, may account for these environmental components. In fact, genetic influences on individual difference at a given time increases with accuracy of measurement. And after correction for random and non-random error, as well as occasional and short-term stable influences, I mean shorter than 10 years, genetic effects account for about 90% of long-term stable, I mean longer than 10 years, individual differences. There are environmental influences on long-term stability too. The last adaptation of the theory in 2008 allows environmental influences which affect change that becomes manifest in long-term stable aspects of personality, but only mediated by biological processes and changes. So this last adaptation is hard to validate without genetically or biologically informative data. Other researchers disagree about the idea that environmental changes become manifest only mediated by biological processes and changes. They explain continuity by genetic as well as environmental factors. For example, continuity in social roles. They attribute change to environmental processes, for example, changes in social roles and major life transitions, but not to genetic maturation. And these perspectives can explain change that becomes manifest in long-term environmental continuity, in particular in middle adulthood. Consistent with these perspectives is the fact that major familial and occupational roles are largely consistent in middle adulthood, accounting for the relatively high stability in personality in this period of life. In each period of life, there are normative biosocial transitions such as puberty, leaving parental home, graduation from school, apprenticeship or university, starting a family, menopause, retirement, and so on. And there occur life events with positive consequences, such as birth of own child, raise of salary, and negative consequences, for example, accident and layoff. So, changes in social roles, individual living conditions, and new persistent demands on the individual can explain personality change in every age. So in line with these perspectives, studies have shown that the transition to a romantic relationship in young adulthood and the transition to a romantic relationship in young adulthood and the stability of this relationship are positively linked to emotional stability. Harmonious and satisfying romantic relationships are associated with an increase in emotional stability. And the other way around, increasing insecurity in relationships predicts increasing neuroticism and introversion. Our experiences not only happen randomly. People actively select, create, and change their environments, for example, by changing their friends, residences, or jobs, or evoke social reactions that match their personality traits. And these environments and social reactions in turn may affect personality traits. For example, emotionally unstable young adults experience or even report more negative life events, for example, sexual problems, than emotionally stable individuals. And these negative conditions in turn affect an increase in neuroticism. Extroverts report or experience more positive life events, for example, job-related promotion, positive stay abroad, than introverts. And positive experiences in turn affect an increase in extroversion. Or another example, on average, extroverts choose or achieve a higher occupational status. And this occupational status enhances extroversion, whereas the reverse can be found for introverts, leading to an increase of variance in extroversion over time. A similar increase of variance can be found for neuroticism. Generally, you know there is a negative normative trend for neuroticism. Emotionally stable people report more financial security compared to less emotionally stable individuals. And this difference appears to enhance over time. Another interesting hypothesis is that the increase of personality stability from childhood to adulthood may reflect a process of social maturation, the development of, committing to, and maintaining an identity that functions and is integrated in its social community, society, and culture. And the increase of personality continuity, at least in middle adulthood, is in fact attributable to an increase of environmental continuity. So in summary, the perspectives of the causal nature of socialization provide further plausible and empirically well-founded alternative hypotheses compared to the theory of biological basic tendencies and maturation and an alternative extension of the genetic set point theory. However, environmental development alone cannot explain the consistent findings of non-perfect genetic continuity in childhood, adolescence, and even in young adulthood. But a theory of genetic maturation can explain this. So now we have two different models. A top-down model that attributes personality change to genetic or environmentally affected but biologically mediated changes. And the other model is a bottom-up model that explains change by environmental sources that become manifest in states and have to be stable or reoccur for a while before they will be permanently anchored in personality traits. And as we have seen, both models alone are not able to explain the whole empirical findings. So, why we do not combine the two models into one model, including genetic and environmental sources of stability and change? And such a model can be described in terms of specific hypotheses that are empirically testable. For example, genetic factors represent the primary source of continuity in personality. So genetic continuity should be larger than environmental continuity, or moreover, genetic contributions to the continuity should be larger than the environmental contributions to the continuity. Genetic maturation explains change in childhood, adolescence, and even in young adulthood. So we should find non-perfect, but an increasing genetic continuity in the first decades of life. And genetic factors are highly stable in middle adulthood, so we should find perfect genetic continuity in this period of life. What about the role of environmental factors? Life experiences may affect personality change in every period of life. So we should find increasing environmental variance compared to the genetic variance over time. Social roles, for example, in family and job, and related experiences are more stable in middle adulthood than in younger and older periods of life. So we should find larger environmental continuity in the middle adulthood than in other life phases. And processes of identity formation that leads to a socially functional and well-adapted personality play a major role in adolescence and young adulthood. So we should find an increasing environmental continuity across adolescence and young adulthood. And some hypotheses on the interplay between genetic and environmental factors. Processes of niche picking, that is, individuals choose environments that match their genetic predispositions, play a major role in adolescence and young adulthood. So we should find larger genetic effects in the first decades of life, so different from cognitive intelligence. And processes of adaptation to maintain the created niches and the functional identity in middle and old adulthood, or the shift from interactions between genetic factors and environmental effects shared by siblings or twins reared together, to interactions between genetic factors and environmental effects not shared by siblings or twins reared together across age, should be in line with an increasing environmental effects in adulthood. To test these hypotheses, longitudinal studies are necessary. I identified 13 longitudinal behavioral genetic studies, including American, Swedish, Finnish, Australian, Belgian, Croatian, and German data from different age groups that have focused on several operationalizations of neuroticism and extroversion. And I also identified 8 behavioral genetic studies, including American, Australian, Swedish, and Dutch data that have studied neuroticism and extroversion in different age groups. And here you can see the results, the patterns of the genetic continuity shown in green, and environmental continuity here shown in red, across the ages from, let's say, 8 to 85. And the average interval of time was here 5 years. And as you can see, the genetic continuity is larger than the environmental continuity. It increases from childhood to adulthood and reaches perfect stability in middle adulthood. The environmental continuity also increases during the first decades of life, reaches relatively high stability in middle adulthood, and then appears to decay again in old age. So what do these results tell us in terms of the hypothesis? We found genetic continuity is larger than environmental continuity, or moreover, not shown in the figures, but I know this and I say it now. The genetic contributions to continuity is larger than environmental contributions to the continuity. So this is in line with the hypothesis that genetic factors represent the primary source of continuity in personality. We found non-perfect but increasing genetic continuity in the first decades of life. And this is in line with the genetic maturation that explains change in childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. We found perfect genetic continuity from middle to old adulthood. And this is in line with the genetic factors are highly stable in middle adulthood. We found larger environmental continuity in middle adulthood than in other life phases. So this is in line with the hypothesis that social roles are more stable in middle adulthood than in younger and older periods of life. And we found an increasing environmental continuity across adolescence and young adulthood. So, processes of social functional personality formation may play a major role in this period of life. And here you can see the trend of heritability estimates, that is the degree to which individual differences are due to genetic influences. For extroversion shown in blue, and for neuroticism shown in orange, across the ages from 8 to 85. And as you can see here, the heritability remains constant or increases during the first decades of life, but then decreases accompanying an increase in variance due to environmental influences. That is, in terms of the hypothesis of an integrative model, the increasing heritability in the first decades of life may reflect processes of niche picking that play a major role in adolescence and young adulthood. The decreasing heritability and increasing environmental effects in middle and old adulthood may reflect processes of adaptation to the environment to maintain the created niches and functional identity. And also the increasing environmental variance over time may be due to the fact that life experiences may affect personality change in every period of life. And in terms of gene-by-environment interaction, interactions between genetic effects and environmental effects shared by siblings or twins reared together act as genetic effects, if important but not taken into account. So if this interaction plays a major role in the first decades of life, then heritability should be larger in younger ages. And interactions between genetic effects and environmental effects not shared by siblings or twins reared together act as an individual environmental influences, if important but not taken into account. So if this interaction, after leaving parental home, plays a major role in adulthood, then heritability should be lower in this period of life. And this is exactly what we can see here in the figure. So, in summary, personality development is a complex affair. We can only understand the complete picture if we focus on both genetic and environmental sources, as well as the complex interplay between nature and nurture, or in words by Sandra Scar, nature proposes and nurture disposes. So thank you for your attention, and thank you for the award.